The New Orleans Saints kick off training camp this week in Irvine, California. Here are the 5 things you need to know to be ready. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network on SI. And on today's episode, we're trying something a little new. I'm going to give you 5 things that you need to know about the New Orleans Saints before training camp kicks off. I'll explain this idea to you here in just a little bit, but I want to go over what we're going to cover today. We're, of course, going to take a look at the offensive line in the major rebuild that's happening with the unit right now, the new offensive system that is entering for the New Orleans Saints, particularly over on the offensive side, what we're expecting to see during training camp for that. And we'll lead off with Alvin Kamara, the New Orleans Saints, still right now at a standoff when it comes to contract negotiations. We're going to break all that down and much more on today's episode of Locked On Saints, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. You can go and check them out today over at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Help you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster and for free. Remember, you can post your job at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Terms and conditions apply. So, look, I wanted to do something a little new here. This is a bonus episode on a Sunday, or at least I'm going to publish this on a Sunday, but I also wanted it to be relevant anytime that you might be finding this episode. And my thought process behind all this is I would typically do during the season on Friday or on Saturdays, a bonus show that was kind of a look back at the week. Here are the 5 biggest stories from the week, or here are a few of the biggest stories from the week in an in case you missed it format. So what I'm going to try to do this time around is effectively give you like the 5 things you need to know before each game. And here, this is the 5 things you need to know before training camp. So if you like this format, let me know and I'll keep it going throughout the regular season, or I'll just go back to in case you missed it, whichever one you like better. But I thought that this would be a good thing for folks that, as a refresher, for folks that have been listening every day, already know what's going on with the Saints, but want a little bit of a refresher. And maybe for folks that are finding the show for the first time, hi, welcome, hope you stick around. Beyond our typical Monday through Friday show format, that kind of just gives you everything you need to know about the biggest stuff going on before we get into training camp with the New Orleans Saints. We're going to dive in a little bit deeper over the course of the next 2 days as well. Monday offense, Tuesday defense, kind of the biggest questions on each side, diving into camp. And then, of course, Tuesday is when we get straight back to 2-a-days, and then on and on with Wednesday beginning, the formal beginning of training camp. So lots of stuff on the way. Hope that you enjoy this. So where I want to start here today is that the New Orleans Saints and Alvin Kamara are still on a standoff when it comes to the contract dispute that led to Alvin Kamara not participating in the final day's practice during mandatory minicamp. But this should not be a surprise. This should not be of concern as of right now. As a quick refresher, Alvin Kamara did not participate in the final day of minicamp. He did the walkthrough and then he left the field. Again, we saw him in the parking lot, all smiles, everything cool. When we spoke with Dennis Allen, as well as Klint Kubiak after that practice, they said that they hadn't yet talked to Alvin Kamara, but they were looking forward to talking to him. They didn't really seem, at least publicly, very bothered by this. And this isn't an outlandish practice at all to see a player do something like this. And the reason why he did it is believed to be connected to a contract dispute, i.e. he wants something done with his contract. He's one of the few contracts that hasn't been touched, really the only contract outside of Juwan Johnson that could save some considerable money via restructure that hasn't been touched yet. And I think a big part of the reason why is because he doesn't just want his contract restructured. I think he probably wants his contract renegotiated and a potential extension that would offer him some guaranteed money in 2025, of which right now he has 0. So a 2-year extension with some guaranteed money in 2025, no guarantees in 2026, at least gives some signal of a commitment from the organization of the near future to the 29-year-old running back by the time that we begin training camp here. So I think that that's probably all that they're waiting for. Now, getting a deal done is probably going to take up a little bit of training camp time. I don't think And I never did think that this was going to get done, this potential extension, this dispute, this standoff, whatever it is that you want to call it. I never assumed and was constantly kind of saying, this will not get done, or it's unlikely that this will get done before the week that training camp starts. Now, here we are, the week that training camp starts, and it hasn't gotten done. No surprise. I won't be surprised to see this take a few days of training camp. I don't think that the panic button, for anybody that would panic in this situation, really has to start being hit or signaled unless he's not shown up for practices for 2 weeks and they haven't made any progress at all in these conversations. Then I think you really get into a little bit of a standoff, like a bigger standoff situation here. But until then, this is kind of how this goes. And as I've expressed before, there's not a lot of examples of things like this not eventually finding a middle ground. Alvin Kamara and his team are not going to be 100% happy with the finished product of this. The New Orleans Saints are not going to be 100% happy with the finished product of this. That's how good negotiations work. Everybody makes sacrifices, and then you come together to agree upon a deal. So I would expect this to take some time. I won't be surprised if the first day of training camp, he's either present but not participating, what we nickname a hold in, because the new CBA has made holdouts really challenging. I think it's like 50 grand a day that you miss and stuff like that. Like it makes a dent very, very quickly. And there might even be multipliers and stuff like that that are all a part of it. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Alvin Kamara like present, but not participating, doing a little bit of the hold-in thing while they figure all this out. And if I'm Alvin Kamara, I'm not risking my body until I know I've got some guaranteed money anyway. So I get all of that. Behind Alvin Kamara, Kendre Miller is going to be the guy that's going to be looked at as kind of the explosive young option. If Alvin Kamara misses a couple days or doesn't participate in some form or fashion in a few days of training camp, more opportunity for Kendre Miller to get acclimated to the new system. We've broken this down before, but with this new offensive system, it's going to be a lot of outside zone runs. Kendre Miller hasn't done a lot of that. He's done a lot of zone run, but not a lot of outside zone run during his time at TCU. So get familiar. It's effectively the same principles. You understand what it is that the offensive line is doing in either case. You're just getting out into more space. That I think could work really well for Kendre Miller. So I think he'll adjust to that pretty clearly, or pretty quickly. But I think more opportunity, the better. The other running backs in that room, specifically at the running back position, not the fullback position, Jamal Williams, Jordan Mims, James Robinson, Jacob Kibodi, who's the undrafted free agent that's come in. Williams, Mims, and Robinson were all with the team last year. Williams still has a role in this offense, even though it's going to be heavily emphasized, the zone run. It's not going to completely eliminate man gap schemes, running between the tackles, all that. You still need that. Jamal Williams, Taysom Hill play a big role in all that. Jordan Mims, James Robinson, those guys feel very comfortable in this system. Jacob Kibodi, learning a little bit more about this system, wanted to land in a place where he could showcase a bit more coming out of college, what he could do as a receiver out of the backfield. Perfect system for him to land in, to be able to do that. So all those guys will get opportunities, whether Alvin Kamara is or isn't participating as well. Look, he's going to be a big part of the 2024 offensive scheme. We've been told that over and over and over again from within the organization. Many, many people, many sources saying that he's a huge part of what it is that New Orleans Saints want to do in 2024. So I assume that there will be a concerted effort in terms of getting this done, right? A concerted interest in getting this done. Everybody's vested. Everyone's invested in getting this done. So I think it will eventually happen, but it's probably going to take a little while. And that's okay. That's fine. Not the end of the world at all. So that's what we're looking at in terms of where everything is with Alvin Kamara. I wouldn't expect much to move before the report for training camp. Then once the report for training camp and everybody's kind of in the same place, gets a little bit easier to start having those conversations. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints are going to be installing a new offensive system. What should you expect from it? And we'll also take a look at one of the biggest acquisitions this offseason for the New Orleans Saints, Chase Young, and an update on when he could be seeing the field for the first time in the black and gold. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Yeah, the NBA and NHL playoffs are all done, but that doesn't mean that the sports ever stop. And thanks to our friends over at FanDuel.com, it gets even more fun every summer because right now they keep the sports going with giving all customers a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long at FanDuel.com, including you can get in on stuff like Over-unders for the New Orleans Saints. They've got over-unders for Derek Carr's passing yards. I think he's going to throw for more than 3,300 yards. They've got receiving yards for Chris Olave. Win total right now is set at 7.5. I think the Saints are going to win more games, less games. What do you think? You can check it all out over at FanDuel.com. That way you can start making the most out of your summer, getting ahead on football season. There's the MLB, WNBA, so much more for you to check out all over at FanDuel, which you can find at FanDuel.com. And remember, FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, family. One of the biggest stories for the New Orleans Saints this offseason as they head into training camp is the introduction of their new offensive system with new offensive coordinator Klint Kubiak. What should you expect? That's number 2 on our 5 things that you should know about the New Orleans Saints before training camp kicks off this week. We appreciate you very much, as always. Making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you go and check out the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 stream, giving you all the biggest stories around sports, programmed specifically to deliver every day, thanks to the local experts here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Go and check it out over on Locked On Sports Today's YouTube page, or you can find the Amazon Fire TV channels app for free as well. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the New Orleans Saints are unveiling a new offensive system in New Orleans, not new to the NFL, but certainly new to the New Orleans Saints. And it's expected to have a pretty positive impact on this New Orleans Saints offense. The New Orleans Saints brought in former pass game coordinator, pass game specialist of the San Francisco 49ers, Klint Kubiak, son of Gary Kubiak, very successful offensive-minded head coach in the NFL, who was a partner of Mike Shanahan, who was Kyle Shanahan's dad. So it was cool to see Kyle Shanahan and Klint Kubiak together in San Francisco for a year. Well, now Klint Kubiak comes to New Orleans as their new offensive coordinator after the team moved on from Pete Carmichael after a shaky offensive season last year. Now, I want to contextualize what I mean by a shaky offensive system from last year, because when you look at the end-of-year rankings for the New Orleans Saints offense, you might say, well, what do you mean, right? The Saints actually looked pretty good on offense. They were 14th when it came to offensive yards, total offense, 11th ranked passing yards as well, but they were 21st in rushing yards. And this is a team that has always talked about how much it wanted to be predicated by its run game. No running back had a rush of over had a rush of over 20 yards last season at all. The only player to have a rush of over 20 yards. I don't know why that's so hard for me to say. The only player to have a single run of 20 or more yards, there we go, was Taysom Hill. No running backs got that done. So yeah, the run game needs a little bit more work. And we even had DVOA creator Aaron Schatz on the show earlier last week, and he mentioned that the Saints run game wasn't as bad. Maybe from an offensive line standard, but certainly from a production standard, it was not good. And so the New Orleans Saints are looking to elevate that. And that's why they bring in the wide zone offense, which is predicated on boosting the run game by getting running backs out in space, doing more creative things. You're going to see things like motion, play action, outside zone runs, which is basically a zone run is when the offensive line moves to block a certain area of the field as opposed to specifically blocking the guy in front of them. And then the outside part of it just means that you're trying to get these runs outside of the tackles to an 8 or a 9 gap would typically be the lingo for the offense. And that could be different types of play calls, whether it's under center, shotgun, whether it's, a pitch, whether it's, all these other things. So there's lots of different kind of numerical values that are used to identify these things, but they all end in 8 or 9 typically. So this is what the New Orleans Saints are going to be looking to do. Now they want to emphasize things like getting the ball out of the hands of the quarterback quickly, yards after catch as well. But really, it all starts with the run game. And so we're going to take a look here in just a little bit about the offensive line and how that potentially plays in, because the Saints are looking to also retool and rebuild their offensive line in the process of introducing a system that is supposed to elevate the run game. I'm going to explain why it could work no matter what. But this is going to be what the big focus is all throughout the offseason. This is what every writer is going to be focused on, what every podcaster is going to be focused on, all that. You're going to hear a lot about the offense, and you're going to hear a little bit less about the defense. Unless the defense has like a big day, then you're going to hear about how the offense was challenged by the defense, right? Like that's the type of kind of color, that's the type of color coding, if you will, that you're going to see from all this, is that you're going to see a lot of everything through the glasses and the lens of offensive conversation, how the defense impacted the offense, all these other things. But that's what happens when you bring in a new offensive system. The other thing that you're hoping that this offensive system does is builds its offense in such a way that it is a little bit more innovative. So this was another example of shaky offense last year. It wasn't as innovative, wasn't as creative, wasn't as complex for an opposing defense, and it wasn't simple enough for your offense at the same time. And you have to find a way to, I know it sounds contradictory, but you have to marry both. You have to do things that are simple on your offense, but that feel complex to the defense. And that's what Sean McVay's entire system is predicated on. That's what the Shanahan system is predicated on, which is what's coming here to New Orleans. So expect to see a whole bunch of that in terms of breakdowns about what they're doing, what's new, what's different. And I think the other thing that you're hoping that this does is that it allows Derek Carr, who finished the season very strong at the end of last year. And I know level of competition wasn't great towards the end of the year. You had a little bit of swollen stuff from the Los Angeles Rams game, but even if you remove the Los Angeles Rams game, still a high performance. And the New Orleans Saints also have a very weak schedule again towards the end of the season in 2024. So ideally, the big thing that you're waiting for here is how many weeks does it take for the Saints to get their legs under them in their new system? And last year it took 12. This year you're hoping it only takes a few games. All that work begins this week in training camp. The New Orleans Saints, here's number 3 for you out of 5. The New Orleans Saints didn't make a lot of big acquisitions this offseason, but one of them was the addition of defensive end Chase Young, former early first-round pick, a guy that everybody expected to be a superstar in the NFL, got traded from the team that drafted him, the Washington Commanders, to the San Francisco 49ers last year, and it now lands with the New Orleans Saints on a very incentive-heavy, based on play time, or game time, active game roster stuff, basically. Not necessarily number of snaps played or anything. You just got to be active on the roster to gather those. But it's a very incentive-heavy deal as he comes to New Orleans on a 1-year deal and then is set to hit the market again at the end of the season, which would, ideally for him, be following a strong season with the New Orleans Saints, where he can revitalize his market, go out there, get a multi-year deal somewhere. The New Orleans Saints recoup a 3rd-round pick as a compensatory selection because of it, and then everybody kind of parts ways and is happy. Unless the New Orleans Saints decide to keep him around, but I think that's probably a little bit more unlikely than him signing elsewhere. So there's optimism here that things are going in the right direction for Chase Young, who did have to have a neck procedure at the end during the offseason. So therefore, he didn't participate in OTAs or minicamps, but he spoke with us. He spoke with media during mandatory minicamps in the locker room. He's been around the facility, all those other things. So he will be starting on the active PUP list along with tight end Juwan Johnson, defensive lineman Tano Passanio, as well as linebacker Nephi Sewell. You can come off that list and return to practice at any time over the offseason. The only time that you're required to miss time is if you are on that list going into the regular season, post-roster cuts. So that could be what happens with Tano Passanio, could be what happens with Nephi Sewell. But with Chase Young and Juwan Johnson, the expectation is that they're returning at some point during training camp. The expectation has always been around Chase Young and Juwan Johnson that they'll be ready to go week 1, but it's looking like Chase Young is a little bit maybe on the earlier side of his anticipated schedule return and could be, I think, not much of a surprise to see him at least out on the field, right? Maybe not participating, but out on the field as early as the first day of training camp. So we'll get a look at that once training camp kicks off in earnest on Wednesday. But so far, so good in terms of the projection for where things are headed for Chase Young. One more little injury list update. Bub Means was originally on the non-football injury list, passed his physical. He's there now. Chris Olave was in a non-contact jersey all throughout mandatory minicamp. So he's going to start on the non-football injury list until I assume he can pass his physical on Wednesday the 23rd, which is his reporting day. I assume that he'll probably come off of non-football injury list pretty quickly from all that, much like Bub Means did. So no need. Doesn't sound like there's much concern there. Certainly we'll learn more mid-week this week. All right, coming up next, there aren't many position battles for the New Orleans Saints, but boy, when it comes to that offensive line, it sure does get interesting. We got that and a quick look at Ryan Ramczyk's end of season and potentially end of career next on today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. Especially if you're hiring for a small business, you're going to want to know about LinkedIn Jobs. You want to make sure you're finding quality professionals to hire for the right roles. So you want to make sure you're finding the right professionals for those roles. And LinkedIn Jobs helps you find those professionals for your team faster and for free. We're not just talking about some random job board here. We're talking about the destination for professionals who are looking to advance their careers. In fact, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. And with LinkedIn, at least 86% of small businesses are finding qualified hires within 24 hours of posting their job. So it's time to hire professionals like a professional. And you got a big old network over at LinkedIn Jobs. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn Jobs for hiring. So join today. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Along with that new offensive system, a lot of the success for the New Orleans Saints in 2024 is going to be predicated on the success of its newly rebuilt and rebuilding offensive line. We appreciate you very much for being here. Don't forget, we are your team every day, literally every day this week and all throughout training camp. I don't think we're going to have a single day without a show. We're going to have a lot of days with 2 shows as we get back to 2-a-days as well. So at the end of each training camp practice, I'll be live from UC Irvine, my alma mater. Go Anteaters, Zot. We'll be taking a look at what happened throughout the day, taking some of your questions, and then every morning answering those questions and giving you an idea of what it is that we're looking at going into the next day of, or that day of training camp. So 2-a-days will be back. And then on days where the Saints don't have practice, I'll still do a show. The only exception will be if they don't have a practice on a Saturday or Sunday. I might take a little moment to rest, but we'll see. Probably not. I was supposed to use this weekend to rest, and instead I've done 2 shows, so we're just going to keep it rolling here on Locked On Saints. Appreciate you very much for being here. Don't forget, we are here daily for you as well. All right, so number 4 of the 5 things that you need to know before the New Orleans Saints begin training camp this week. The Saints don't have a lot of position battles going on in terms of starting roles, at least, but the biggest ones are indeed happening. And a lot of it has to do with them rebuilding their offensive line. I don't want to go without mentioning the strong safety battle, the safety next to Tyrann Mathieu. Feels like Jonathan Abrams, job to lose, but Jordan Howden's going to challenge. Will Harris is going to challenge. JT Gray is going to challenge. Ugo Amadi is going to challenge. There's so many of these young, versatile, talented safeties that the Saints are going to be able to find somebody that they really like. And then, of course, there's still the pipe dream out there of Justin Simmons floating around. We'll see. Ravens just signed another safety. The Seahawks signed a safety, all that stuff. So maybe we'll see. But it's really the offensive line that I think is the one that maybe has the most impact on the Saints' success as a team in 2024. You're looking at a new starter at left tackle, a new starter at right tackle, and a new starter at left guard. And in any case, one of those positions, either one of the tackle spots, is going to be filled by a very talented player in first-round selection in the 2024 NFL Draft, rookie Taliesin Fuanga, who was drafted out of Oregon State. Now, Taliesin is a career right tackle, but the Saints moved him over to left tackle all through OTA's mandatory minicamps. It remains to be seen if that is a permanent change or if the New Orleans Saints were just doing some information gathering at that time, and if maybe he stays at left tackle or moves over to right tackle during training camp. Certainly something that we'll be tracking. The interesting additional piece to that is that Trevor Penning, who was the guy that was drafted a few years ago to be the future left tackle of this team, was then moved from left tackle to right tackle after struggling to adjust his game and after the Saints have struggled to help him transition his game, both things can be true, to that left tackle spot in the NFL. Now you have a new offensive system, a new offensive line coach in John Benton, who's a fantastic developer, and so you've moved him from left tackle over to right tackle to try to give him a clean state from which to start from zero, basically. Give him an opportunity to learn not only a new offense, but also relearn his fundamentals, relearn his passing sets, and do it from something that feels unfamiliar, therefore it feels new, and then see if he's able to catch on to it. There's some logic there. Position changes, however, don't typically end up benefiting the struggling. And we'll see if that changes here with Trevor Penning, or if Trevor Penning is able to go against the grain. Here's why I think this can work for the New Orleans Saints no matter what. Oh, and by the way, there'll be a new starter at left guard as well. The Saints didn't retain Andrus Peat. James Hurst retired. Both of those guys have played left guard for this team over the course of the past couple of years. The expectation is that Nick Saldiveri, who was drafted last year in the 4th round, will be the starter there, but there are a lot of guys that are able to challenge there. Aliudo, who we haven't seen before, who has spent time with the Minnesota Vikings, and Klint Kubiak with that team back in 2021. You got to look at other guys like Shane Lemieux, as well as Lucas Patrick, who have a lot of experience playing the guard position at the NFL level as well, and have some experience in these wide zone offenses. Shane Lemieux being an excellent example of that during his college days with the Oregon Ducks. So you're going to have at least 3 new starters, or potentially 3 new starters in different positions if Trevor Penning doesn't start at left tackle, but at right tackle instead. Still new, right? But here's why I think it can work. If the Saints get it right at left tackle, they could be fine. This is what San Francisco does, Miami does, as well as a few other offensive lines out there. This is what they do. They get the most important position right, which is the blindside tackle in many eyes, and then they kind of just fill the rest of the offensive line out with C, B graded type players. The good news for New Orleans is that they have an A graded player at center, one of the best centers in the NFL in Eric McCoy. They have a really solid player in Cesar Ruiz, regardless of what people may tell you. And then if you can get the right left tackle, which might be rookie Taliesin Fuanga, then you're going to be in a really, really good position to kind of mimic what it is that San Francisco and Miami have been doing for years. Get the blindside protector and then figure the rest of it out. The Saints will have the blindside protector, 2 solid interior pieces, then they got to figure the rest of it out. So if they can get that done, they might actually be in good position. The better scenario, though, is that they find the right pieces that fit at left tackle, right tackle, and left guard. Get your best 5 offensive linemen out there, regardless of who they are, what their natural position is, whatever it might be, and then go out there and ball out. That's what the New Orleans Saints really need to happen. Training camp is where that all gets started. And as we wrap up here, the 5th and final thing you need to know before training camp gets started is Ryan Ramczyk's season is over. And potentially, so is his career, which really stinks. Okay? Really, really stinks. One of the better players that the New Orleans Saints have ever drafted back in 2017. When he was drafted, everyone knew he was dealing with some back issues, but then he was also dealing with some knee issues. Turns out those knee issues are degenerative knee issues, not injuries that were recurring or anything like that. This is the body being the body. And so he ended up not being able to finish out the season last year. When he didn't finish out the season last year, there were some kind of solemn conversations in terms of his presser, which was very low energy, kind of low expectation. This might be it. This is kind of what it felt like, all this other stuff. Then all of a sudden at the combine, things started to feel really good. Hey, he's making good progress in his recovery, had an off-season minor procedure to clean up his knee, but didn't have a major procedure, things like that. And he's recovering well. Things are trending in the right direction, so on and so forth. Then the owners' meeting happened about a month later, and then everything changed. Hey, Dennis Allen kind of talking about how, man, things aren't really progressing the way that we thought that they would, all these other things, so don't really know. Then we got into OTAs, we got into minicamps, no Ryan Ramczyk around, although we heard he was at the facility, rumors flying around about, or reports flying around actually, about how he had lost a lot of weight and all these other things, which is like a quintessential sign of the end of an offensive lineman's career, right? So like the first thing that they do when they retire, they drop a bunch of weight, get comfortable, boom. Seems like he apparently has dropped a lot of weight. So with that being the case, when we got the news last week that he was placed on the reserve PUP list, which is a different list than Chase Young, Juwan Johnson, Nephi Sewell, and Tano Passanio, it kind of signaled, all right, well, he's probably going to be shut down for the season. Well, it actually signaled more than just that. It did shut him down for the season. When you are a vested veteran, i.e. somebody that has enough years of experience in the NFL, I believe it's beyond 3 years, then if you get put on the reserve PUP list before the season begins, it's the same thing as going to off-season IR. Your season is done. And we believe, based on all the things that we just highlighted, that his career may also be done as well. So why not retire? Well, if he retired right now, a whole bunch of money would accelerate into the next 2 years and absolutely decimate the New Orleans Saints salary cap situation. So instead, you put him on reserve PUP, wrap up his season this year, and then you start to progress and process that retirement conversation next year. Unless there's a surprise and he maybe comes back next year after taking a year off. But typically players that take an entire year off from football will probably stay away from football. And that might not be the worst decision for Ryan Ramczyk to enjoy the quality of life that he can have post the game. So we'll see where things go there. But that is what we're expecting at this moment. Quick little bonus for you, just a reminder that the New Orleans Saints are practicing out of town throughout training camps. They're going to be in Irvine, California, not here in New Orleans, but do not worry. I will be there every single day. We'll have every bit of news for you here on the show, 2 shows a day. There's also the Locked On Saints Insider Program where you can get immediate news and notes following practice days as well. Some other big news for me coming on the way as well. So lots of good stuff. If you're interested in the Insider Program, just text Saints or Whodat to 504-285-7473. Q&As, film studies, practice notes, first people to get those practice notes, all of that you can find in that Insider Program. And of course, we'll be here with you every single day, all throughout training camp. So subscribe, make sure that you're locked in. The Locked On Saints podcast every single day. Appreciate you very much for joining us for this 5 things episode of the show that you need to know going into Saints training camp. If you like the format, let me know, and I'll do much, much more all throughout the season. Y'all take care, and I will see you very soon. Thank you so much. As always, make Locked On Saints a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust to that nation. I'll holla at you. The only player to have a rush of over 20 yards. I don't know why that's so hard for me to say.